and like I said before, everything is hooked up to Ableton Live, and it's incredible. And they're spending a lot of time programming the stuff. And for a band that doesn't have a lot of money to spend on the tour, but wants to make an impact, that's and I saw the videos. It looks incredible because everything is timed. You know what I mean? Like the chorus hits and all the lights go crazy, and it goes back down on the verse. It's very impressive.
In collaboration with Zoom, the makers of the Q2N 4K camera.
Hi, Whynot. Welcome to MIDI Talk.
Hi, Simone. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for your time, for joining us in this session. You know that here at Audio Modeling, we are connecting with artists all around the world to grab their secrets and to talk about the role of technology with music. So we have been spending some time to talk about artist experiences. So I'm glad to have you here. I would like to ask you to introduce yourself. Your name is Whynot Jansveld, but maybe you can tell more about your name and your background in the education and music, and then I have some questions that regarding your career and your activity.
Sure, yeah. Well, my name, my first name, Whynot, is obviously a nickname, and I'm from Holland originally, or the Netherlands, same thing. And in Dutch, my first name is Wynand, and since I live in the United States, way too Dutch. and so I realized early on that would just be just kind of a hassle every time I introduced myself. And the Whynot thing came from a joke that English friends of my parents made when I was about 10 years old, and we visited them in England, and they were trying to pronounce my name, and they thought it sounded like Whynot, and so they're like, oh, we'll just call him Whynot. And then so when I moved to the United States, I sort of reintroduced that, and that's how I became Whynot. And it's easy to remember. I think it generally works in my favor, and I always say it's a good motto to live by. And
yeah, it's very funny.
yeah. And I'm from the Netherlands. I have now lived in the United States longer than I ever lived in Holland. I moved to Boston when I was 24, and I had spent some time traveling in the United States when I was a little bit younger, when I was like 18 or so, and growing up on a lot of rock and pop music that was on the radio. A lot of it came from here, and so I think ultimately that's why I wanted to explore this place, and why I ended up staying and becoming a professional musician here. But yeah, I first moved to Boston to attend Berkeley College of Music for a semester, and then that turned into a year, and then that turned into 3 years, and then that turned into 16 years in New York City, and now about 10 years in Los Angeles.
It's incredible. What did you study at Berkeley?
At Berkeley, I studied performance, which really, I'm a bass player mostly, and that seemed to me, I wasn't too concerned with picking the right major. At Berkeley, I just wanted to be there, and I just wanted to meet people, and I wasn't too concerned about whether I picked the right thing, because I was very much focused on being a bass player, and so that seemed like the most straightforward, way to spend time over there.
I see. That's really interesting. And what was your first connection, let's say, with technology? So what was the first time you connected your musical experience with some gear or with some software with some technology? What was the first touch?
The first touch really was, honestly, so when I was 18, I traveled for a year in a group called Up With People. And it was an organization, at the time it was based in Tucson, Arizona. And it's to describe it very quickly, it's basically like a big organization where you travel in a group of about 100 students, and you put on a show. They're all amateurs, dancers, singers, musicians, and there's kind of a big community service aspect to it. And so you stay with host families about 3 days in every town, a lot of small towns, put on the show, but also, do things like visit a school or a nursing home or a prison or things like that. And so I did that for a year, and I was the bass player in that particular group. And this was 1987. And so, we had, I mean, it seems like so long ago, because it is, in terms of like technology, of course, it's a few lifetimes. But we had a sequencer. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was a Roland sequencer, MC something or other. And growing up, I never considered myself to be any good at technology at all, because I had older brother who was very much into computers, and he understood all that stuff, and he was sort of like the tech guy in the family, and sometimes that makes the rest of the family dumb, basically. And so we always left that stuff to him, but he wasn't around. And so we had that sequencer, we had a Yamaha RX-5 drum machine, and I just started messing around with it on our free time, because I wanted to learn how that worked, and I thought I could somehow make something out of it, and I did. So that was kind of the first time that I realized, like, oh, you can use, like, this thing is the sound source, but this thing is telling that thing to make the sound, and you can program it, and you can, if you spend enough time with it, you can make it do anything you want. And of course, relative to what we can do today, it was all very, very primitive. But that was the first time that I messed with something like that. And then just to elaborate on that, when I went to Berkeley, I wanted something like that to mess around with, and I had a friend who he was actually this singer of a band that I was in, and I asked him about it, and he had an old Mac SE30 computer, one of the little boxy ones with the black and white screen, that he wasn't using, and he sold it to me for cheap, and it had Vision installed on it, the old music production software, and so that's really when I had my own thing at where I lived, and I could really, like, get into working with it and making it do what I needed it to do.
I see. Yeah, but basically, many artists like you had the first started to work with technology, usually with sequencer and production tools. Yeah. So it is really very common. And I would like to ask you something about your touring experience. So there are some parts of this job that I am really curious. I would like to know how do you usually prepare for a tour, and what is the process of preparing a tour and then going on tour? What is your approach?
For me, I mean, when I go on tour, it's as a bass player, and so my use of technology, as far as that goes, is fairly limited. I have gotten into using effects a lot over the years, and in more recent years, just because I was doing a lot of like flying to different places and having a huge pedal board seemed it just became kind of a hassle. And I started looking into like what's the best that exists right now in terms of like multi effects, right? Like a self-contained floorboard. And so I used Fractal gear for years. I had an AX8 that was great and could basically do anything that I needed it to do. And I was very much into, for a while, I was into creating sounds as a bass player that were kind of like separate from my bass playing, if that makes any sense. And so like I'd play the bass, but I would also, by playing the notes that I played, would generate these kind of pads using the Fractal gear that sounded not that if you were in the audience, you would have no idea that it came from me. Separate line to the house, and it was kind of clever. It would like add a layer that I could sort of like use a volume pedal to add it when there was a chorus or a bridge that needed a little bit of a lift, and that was really fun to experiment with. But mainly I'm a bass player. And so as far as the tour is concerned, my preparation involves really nothing more than learning the songs if it's a new project that I'm working with. And that's time consuming in itself, of course. It can be. But I will say that I have put a lot of thought into having basically like a mobile production studio with me at all times. And it's incredible what you can do with that these days, right? I have a laptop. I have a little bag here. I'll show you. This is my studio.
Wow.
Yeah, I have my Apogee Jam, and I have an Apogee mic here, and some hard drives and a couple of cables, and that's it. That's sort of all I need. Because I do a lot of composing, and I also master tracks, which obviously is a little bit hard to do on the road because you are on headphones, and so I try to avoid doing it on the road unless like somebody needs something quickly, then you have to do it on headphones. But the fact that I can work in my studio here at home, disconnect everything, close the laptop, put it in a bag, and take it on the road and open it up in a coffee shop, and everything is there that I was working on, and I can keep working on stuff. It's really incredible. And I certainly remember touring when there was nothing like that, right? Like we went on tour. I mean, I'm dating myself, but that's okay. Like we went on tour, and if we didn't have cell phones even. This is right before cell phones is when I started touring, and it's incredible how much I can get done now when I'm not at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you just pointed out two important things. One thing is that, of course, you have a kind of digital rig that is flexible enough for traveling and powerful to deliver you any kind of sounds and expressivity that you may need on tour. But also the role of technology has improved that you can fill your free time and you can still working on composing and doing other music projects when you are on the road and touring. So it's incredible the possibility of mobile technology that has provided us. I think that it's really an interesting tip. And I have another question about the preparation. So when you talk about learning the songs to play, what do you do? Do you learn, let's say, at home in your studio by yourself, reading music? Do you prepare the sounds, or there is also a preparation with the band? So how do you interact with the band and the other musicians during the preparation?
Sure. Yeah. Well, mostly when it comes to like learning the songs, generally speaking, it's expected that if, assuming that there are rehearsals for whatever you're doing, it's generally expected that when you show up for the first rehearsal that you know everything.
Of course.
Which, you can spend all that time then figuring out who plays what, and I do take that very seriously, and there as well, the technology has improved things, because you used to be, you can have a stack of papers, and now with my iPad and an Apple Pencil, I write all my charts on that. And I generally speaking, and I think I'm a little bit different than most musicians in this regard. I almost never touch a bass guitar while I'm preparing for any of this, even up until the point where I get to the rehearsal. Like, I won't actually have played it. I just do it all in my head for some reason that works for me. Which also means that I can, we were just talking about using your downtime, and to me, like, I get a big kick out of being on a 5-hour flight and transcribing a whole set worth of tunes and then going through it one more time. You know what I mean? Like, it's so useful to do that kind of stuff. And again, with the iPad, I have my in-ears plugged into the iPad. 3/4 of my screen is where I write my chart, and the little quarter of the screen is my music program, and I'm just playing the music and rewinding a little bit and playing it and just writing as I go along. And I could do that in an airplane seat or on a day off on tour or something like that. So that's how I prepare for myself, generally speaking. And then, when it comes to actually rehearsing, it all depends on the particular group of people. But generally speaking, most of my fellow musicians who I end up on tour with kind of have the same approach, and rehearsing really is about fine tuning. Right when you first play the tune, it already sounds like something, and at that point, it's mostly up to the artist to say, like, hey, I want to play this differently, or let's play it more like this or that. And that's kind of like a personal thing that's kind of a little bit different every time.
I see. And usually during a tour, there are some changes on, let's say, on the arrangement or the parts to play, or on the set list. Are there any changes, or usually when you prepare a tour and after the rehearsal and you have put everything together with your band members, you let's say keep it frozen?
No, there are usually changes, and I would say most of the bands that I have toured with aren't, are a little bit more old school, I would say, as far as like what touring can encompass these days. Because I also, like some tours, everything is run by Ableton, including all the lights and all that kind of stuff, and it takes a lot more to change things up, because because somebody has to go in and reprogram stuff. The last few tours I've done, currently I'm touring with the Wallflowers, and before that was with Butchwalker, and both of those were really rock shows, and changing something up really was just a matter of changing up the set list, and okay, well, I guess that's what we're doing now, and so it doesn't involve that much, and things change every night, generally speaking.
I see.
Yeah.
And can you remember what was the most challenging tour in your career?
That's a good question. I think I've been pretty lucky in the sense that I've always enjoyed who I've played with. I guess the biggest change was my first sort of like big national and international touring, which was with Gavin DeGraw in 2004, 2005. Just because it was the biggest change. I'd never been on a tour bus before, and I'd never played to sort of consistently to crowds that big, and but I can't say that it was hard. I just love doing it.
I see.
Yeah. And I feel that way. Like some people you have more of a real connection with than others. that's okay. And so I guess the most challenging ones would be where you kind of realize like I don't have that much in common with this person, or like our connection is more is purely professional for as long as this tour lasts, and I probably won't speak to them after. You know what I mean? Like that happens, but that's rare. I would say I would say that that I become, I don't know if I become friends with all the artists that I play with, but it's certainly like it's like a real personal connection.
Yeah, I can imagine that it could be hard and challenging to spend a lot of times with always with the same people, because the tour is you are close with other people. You are traveling maybe every night and wake up in a different place. So
Yeah, no, it's really true, and I think that for that reason, artists and their management team, and whoever is involved in deciding who's going to be on the tour, that they spend a lot of time, I think, thinking about that part of it. Right? You can have the best band in the world, but if those people are trouble in one form or another, whatever that means to you, then it's not going to work. And with that too, I feel extremely fortunate that I've toured with some incredible musicians, but also just incredible human beings that I love being around. So that makes it fun and nice.
now that's really interesting. And coming back to the technology, what do you think? Of course, we talk about the role of technology for you to work as to do other work when you're on tour. But on stage, what have you seen during the years changing with the technology? What do you think that technology made during the last years?
Well, certainly, I do a fair amount of touring where it's usually the drummer who, like, if there's tracks, for instance, those things are becoming more dependable and less failure prone, and which of course, with again, modern computers and iPads and all that kind of stuff, there's really no limit as to what you can do about it. So that happens a lot, and that seems to work well and fail fewer times, which is the worst when it does. And I was actually just talking to on this last tour that I did, one of the younger guys on the crew, drum tech. He's a drummer in a band himself, and those guys, they travel with their own lights, and they play, sort of 300-400 person rooms, and like I said before, everything is hooked up to Ableton Live. And it's incredible, and they're spending a lot of time programming the stuff. And for a band that doesn't have a lot of money to spend on the tour, but wants to make an impact, that's and I saw the videos. It looks incredible because everything is timed. You know what I mean? Like the chorus hits, and all the lights go crazy, and it goes back down on the verse. It's very impressive. That's not something that I have to deal with.
Yeah, sure.
But it's certainly out there.
Yeah, and what do you think as if of course if there is some changes, but do you think that the role of the technician has changed during the years with the different technology possibilities? What do you think, in your opinion, what the impact of technology for the technician and people that are helping the musician on stage?
I think that a lot of times these days, the front of house engineer is also the tour manager, depending on the size of the. But if it's a smaller thing, then they often have to do both those things, which of course is challenging. But I realized that especially when we're on in-ears, a lot of times these days. We can do our own mixes on an iPad, and that obviously is dependent on the gear that is at the venue, or if the tour that you're on, if they bring their own gear, and that's really nice and offloads some of what a front of house engineer might also be doing monitors, normally speaking, but if they don't have to do that anymore, and we can do it ourselves. I much prefer doing it myself because. It's that thing. You only have so much time for sound check, and everybody kind of wants to change 30 things, but you can't. And so you have to pick your battles and be like, okay, this thing really is too loud, or this thing I can't hear. But if you can do it yourself, that's a nice thing.
Yeah, this is really an interesting point. Also, regarding the introduction of the in-ear monitoring. What do you think? I'm supposing that you are happy about that, but I remember that some musicians are a little bit at the beginning, especially when they switched to in-ear monitoring, they suffer a little bit. What is your personal experience?
Obviously having in-ears, you can make a beautiful mix. But it does feel like you're just cut off from the world, and so I've actually spent considerable time thinking about this stuff. And I had a long tour in Japan about 3 years ago, and I started looking into getting new in-ears, and there's a company called Sensophonics here in the United States who have this. It's basically like a technology where your in-ears also have microphones on them, and you carry an extra pack. And so basically the sound from the microphones goes down the wire into the first pack, and then that goes into your normal monitor pack, and then you can mix in the sound of the microphones with the board feed coming from the monitor side of things. And there's it's really an incredible concept, if a little bit of a hassle to deal with, but at the time it was worth it to me to do it, because feeling the room and even just walking towards the drums, and the drums get louder, and walking towards the guitar amp, or the singer walking up to you and they say something, and if you have normal in-ears, then you just nod and you hope it wasn't important. That type of thing. But to actually be able to hear the room, to me, is I can't overstate how important that is to me, right? Because I'm not just there to play the notes. I'm there to perform for sometimes an incredibly huge room with a lot of people in it, and I want to have like an actual feeling about how that feels to me, and how that makes me play, and how that makes me perform. So I know that there are different companies sort of like messing with that concept, and I think there's room for improvement in how that's implemented. But it's something that I'm always kind of seeking out, like, okay, who's doing what in this field, because I actually think that hopefully 10 years from now that'll just be normal, that you can actually hear your surroundings, but at a lower level, so that you don't go deaf.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's really interesting. So we find out another technology aspect that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because I was curious about that, because now the in-ear technology is very common, and I wanted to know what is your experience. I was wondering that maybe just adding an ambient microphone on stage, or a couple of mic that can be routed only to the in-ear, can give just a little bit more feeling about the venue. But of course, it will be fixed. It should not be changing if you move around, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. And it does help. And if whoever does the monitor mix, if they do it well, it can make a really big difference in that aspect of it, where you feel you have a sense of the room. And but depending on where they're placed, it doesn't do anything when you're trying to talk to somebody. You'd have to pull it out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. And I have another question, that because when you were speaking to me and about your mastering engineering activities, and that's, of course, you were saying that when you are on the road is more difficult because it depends on the room. And then a question came into my mind. Now the music is also listen more and more from small in-ear headphones, and also from the speakers of our phones. How do you deal with that, especially with people that are listening from YouTube, so with a very compressed also system, channel, let's say broadcasting channel, but also from a very unusual, but now we have to say usual loudspeaker, like our mobile phones.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, my view on it is that first of all, it's impossible to do a different master for all those listening environments, because you can't, because you don't know what people are listening on. In my experience, it's not as complicated as it seems. Meaning, and part of this is also the whole debate on the streaming services, right? Where like Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube, they all have slightly different protocols in place about how loud they say it should be, and if it's louder than that, they're gonna, you're gonna be penalized, and they're gonna squash your stuff. In my personal experience, and of course it can't always be this simple, but if I had to put it very, very simply, I would say nice and loud still works all of the time. And it sounds dumb, but that's just my experience. And by nice and loud, I mean it's nice and loud. It's you know what I mean. You're definitely pushing up against 0 dB or a little bit less. You're definitely compressing and limiting things. But with the tools that we have these days, and in my experience, that's mostly software. You can get things nice and loud and still have them be dynamic and not really experience sort of like a feeling that things are squashed or pumping or just made worse. And I find that if I make it nice and loud, it kind of works everywhere. It works on a CD. It works on vinyl, even though I always tell people I do not specialize in mastering for vinyl. I think that's a separate craft. But sometimes people don't want to do the extra step of having it, specifically mastered for vinyl. And plenty of stuff that I've mastered has ended up on vinyl, and it's always sounded good to me and to them as well. It works for the streaming services. It works on an MP3. It works coming out of my phone. You know what I mean? And so. Yeah. I can't think of a way that I could sort of like make this more complicated for myself, to where maybe I can't imagine compensating on a master so that it sounds a certain way on an iPhone speaker or something like that, because it would severely compromise what you're listening to when you're streaming it, or when you're listening to it on a CD. So that's a long way around of having a very simple answer, which is nice and loud seems to work pretty much all of the time.
Good.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. I think that simplicity also in the approach leads to the best results. I totally agree.
Yeah, and you know, but to that point, it's sort of why I ended up in mastering in the first place. Never in a million years growing up did I think that A, that's something I wanted to do, or B, that I had the skills or the ears to do. And it was, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, is when I kind of ended up doing it. And it was simply because a friend of mine had some new tracks mastered, and they were pretty unhappy with how it sounded, and they got one revision out of the you know, professional mastering engineer who mastered it, and they still weren't happy. And I had started composing music mostly for commercial stuff, and I had used those tools to make my stuff sound as good as I thought that it could be. And so I just told him, like, why don't you send me your tracks and I'll see if I can beat it. And so that led to a whole bunch of other stuff with him and people that he recommended me to, and it kind of just, you know, took off from there. But to your point about simplicity, I don't do anything special, and I don't have any tools that you or I or anybody else doesn't have access to. But I take the time, and I pay attention, and I trust my ears enough and my experience in music enough to know what I want to hear. But I don't start altering things just because somebody is paying me money to master it. If the mix sounds great, then I make it louder, and I make it, but I keep it dynamic. And it's all, and I think, you know, I talk about this on my little website. It's a simple concept, but apparently it goes wrong often enough that there's room for me to do this. And I think a lot of times keeping it simple is the right way to go.
Yeah, I totally agree. Also because now that we have access to an unlimited tools, so you can load in your computer anything. Yep. So I'm just thinking about young students or people that are approaching for the first time a mastering task, that it could be really difficult to guess what to do and what to choose, because the offer of technology is very huge in that field, right?
Yeah, it's really incredible what's out there, and but again, I think you just have to trust your own ears and trust that you know that you know music and what that's supposed to sound like, and there is a lot out there, and I try not to go too deep down all the rabbit holes, because it would never end, essentially.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just when we were speaking about mastering, and I have a question about mixing, and especially for live. I know that you are not doing that when you are on tour, but I would like to know your opinion. Now, with the introduction of digital mixers, so live you can save and recall the mix of the entire band. So how do you do you in your experience, the people that works with you deal with that? Do you prepare the show and the overall band mixing before the show, and then you make changes and adapt that first step of mixing to the venue and the different places, or do you work in another way, or you make a different mix every time, starting, let's say, from scratch? I'm just curious about the use of digital mixers.
As far as front of house mixers, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. I could imagine that the people that I work with, if they, because they often request a certain front of house mixer, and I do, what I can tell you is this, that for us, for the band, for the monitor mix, like for instance, when I play with Richard Marx, the front of house guy will request like a certain type of mixer, or maybe like one of like 3 particular boards for the monitor mix, and he has our mixes saved. And especially when we're on in-ears, of course, the variables are much smaller, like because it's just us and it's kind of always the same, right? And so in that sense, like that is super helpful if you're doing a run of a few weeks, and every time when you get the sound check, it's already the mix from the night before. I mean, it saves so much time, and you know, we're talking about the role of technology, like that to me will make touring, you know, once that's normalized, where like you always have that mix in your ears, and you might make small tweaks based on, I don't know, like what that room is sounding like, or how much rumble you're getting from the stage or something like that. But if you can start where you left off the night before, it's an incredible time saver, because you do spend a lot of time, you know, kick, okay, who wants kick? You know, snare, who wants snare? No more, you know, one more kick. You know, it takes a lot of time, and it seems incredibly repetitive for no reason. And so yeah, so that's I can answer your question from the perspective of somebody who's on stage, when that's in place, and sometimes it's like, hey, we have this type of board, and the last mix we have saved on this particular brand is from 2 weeks ago, and so that's what we're starting with. Even that is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah.
So no, that's really nice to hear from someone like you that has been a lot on touring to know what happened, and also maybe it will be nice, I'm thinking out loud, to arrange a session with somebody on the house mixer, so we could ask other question about the role of technology. So
right,
we will do, absolutely. And I think that we are going to the end of this podcast, and I have only last question that you don't have to answer if you don't have an answer for that, but I'd like to know that if you do you have any request for the music industry manufacturer, for people that are working in technology? So if you had magic wand, what gear you would like to have? So any request?
Okay, I'll tell you. I would love a floor box with a bunch of switches on it that can load plugins, audio units. Plain and simple, just a big old hefty processor, like a really amazing CPU, bunch of RAM, and all that, because I have incredible stuff that I can use on my computer, and I would love to use all of it live, and I know that people have taken a stab at that particular idea, like even from like a good number of years ago. I remember something like that existing, or at least it was announced. I don't know if it was ever made. I don't know what the if there would be sort of like problems with licensing and that type of stuff, but that'd be awesome.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Why not? I really thank you for joining us and for your time and your experience, for sharing your experience. So thanks.
and I want to thank you. I mean, we haven't talked at all about what you guys do, but I just want to say, like, it's such an exciting technology for me. Like what you guys do, where you basically create these sounds out of nothing is pure magic to me. And there's no limit to how far that can go, right? Like when you have to like record somebody playing and then somehow script that into a playable instrument, that's also incredibly impressive. but I feel like what you guys are doing, like I can't wait to see what's next, and I'm having a lot of fun playing your instruments, and I'm going to be using them a lot. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah.